I was the family black sheep until the day I inherited everything and watched them all come crawling back. Growing up, I was the family disaster. While my cousins were collecting honor roll certificates and college acceptance letters, I was collecting detention slips and disapproving looks from every adult in my orbit. By 18, I'd managed to flunk out of Northwestern after exactly one semester, a record that still makes my stomach twist with embarrassment. My grand plan? Working the floor at Sam Ash Music Store in Chicago. You'd think I'd murdered someone, based on my family's reaction. Every holiday became my personal walk of shame. Thanksgiving dinner at Grandma's house in Evanston was the worst. My Aunt Caroline would conduct her annual achievement parade around the dining table, her voice dripping with pride as she updated everyone on her children's latest conquests. Bradley just made partner at his law firm downtown, she'd announce, cutting into her turkey with surgical precision. And Stephanie's interior design business just landed that new hotel project in River North. The one that's going to be featured in Architectural Digest. Then her eyes would find me, sitting there in my thrift store sweater, and her smile would shift into something that looked like pity wrapped in politeness. And Evelyn is still exploring her options in retail, aren't you, dear? My mother would practically choke on her cranberry sauce, desperate to change the subject before I could respond. As if my working at a music store was some temporary mental breakdown I'd eventually recover from. Christmas was even worse. Everyone else got thoughtful presents. Bradley received a $300 leather briefcase. Stephanie got professional photography equipment for her business. I'd unwrap a generic $20 Starbucks gift card like I was the family's obligatory charity case. During family photos, they'd arrange me in the back corner behind Uncle Robert's shoulder, as if I were photobombing my own relatives. I started calling it my witness protection position. But the moment that broke something inside me happened at Bradley's engagement party 2 years ago. I'd brought my boyfriend Danny, hoping that having a successful paramedic by my side might earn me some respect. Danny was smart, funny, had his life figured out, everything my family claimed to value. When Bradley's fiancée, this perfectly polished blonde named Tiffany, asked what I did for work, I straightened my shoulders and said I managed the vintage instrument section at Sam Ash. She actually giggled. Not just smiled, giggled. Like I'd told her I was a professional unicorn trainer. Oh, how creative, she said, then immediately pivoted to ask Danny about emergency response protocols, effectively erasing me from the conversation entirely. Danny broke up with me the following week over coffee at a Starbucks in Lincoln Park. His exact words, "I need someone who's going somewhere in life, Evelyn. You're 26 and still playing around with guitars like you're in high school." That night, sitting alone in my studio apartment, I made a decision that would change everything. No more family gatherings. No more apologizing for who I was. I deleted most of their numbers, blocked them on Instagram and Facebook, and started building a life that actually belonged to me. I had no idea that decision would lead me to the most important person I'd ever meet, and ultimately, to watching my entire family eat their words. Moving downtown to a cramped studio above a Korean restaurant was the best decision I'd ever made. The rent was cheap, the bulgogi smells were incredible, and most importantly, it was mine. No family photos glaring at me from the walls, no reminders of the daughter I was supposed to be. 3 blocks away, I discovered Fletcher's Vintage Instruments, this magical little shop squeezed between a used bookstore and a dry cleaner. The owner, Walter Fletcher, was this 70-something eccentric who looked like he'd stepped out of a 1960s folk album. Wild gray hair, vintage band t-shirts, and hands that moved over guitar necks like he was reading Braille. "You know anything about instruments, kid?" he asked on my first visit, not looking up from the 1965 Rickenbacker he was restringing. "Some," I said, which was a massive understatement. I'd been playing guitar since I was 12, teaching myself everything from Johnny Cash to Joni Mitchell. Music was the only thing that had ever made sense to me. Walter glanced up, studying my face with sharp blue eyes. "Play something." He handed me a beat-up Martin acoustic that probably cost more than my car. My fingers found the strings, and I played Blackbird, not the simple version everyone knows, but the complex finger-picking arrangement that takes years to master. When I finished, Walter was grinning like he'd just discovered buried treasure. "You start Monday," he said. "I've been looking for someone who gets it. Someone who understands these aren't just instruments, they're time machines." For 3 years, Walter became the family I'd always needed. Every Tuesday, We'd order deep dish pizza from Lou Malnati's and he'd tell me stories about buying guitars from folk singers in the 70s, about the Telecaster that Bonnie Raitt had played, about the Gibson that had belonged to a blues legend whose name I couldn't repeat in polite company. "See this?" he'd say, running his fingers along a scratch on a 1959 Les Paul. "That's not damage, Evelyn. That's history. That's some guitarist in Detroit in 1973 getting so lost in a solo that he scraped the paint against his belt buckle. You can't fake that kind of story." He taught me everything. How to spot a genuine vintage Fender from a convincing reproduction. How to rewire old amplifiers that should have been declared fire hazards decades ago. How to restore instruments that other shops would have written off as scrap wood. My family stopped trying to contact me altogether, except for occasional guilt-trip texts from my mother asking when I was going to come home and be sensible. I ignored them all. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged. Walter never talked about money or family. He lived simply, drove a beat-up Honda Civic, wore the same rotation of vintage band shirts. His apartment above the shop was cramped and cluttered with instrument cases, but he seemed genuinely happy surrounded by his musical treasures. I thought I knew everything about him. I was wrong about that too. But I wouldn't discover just how wrong until that terrible Thursday morning when my entire world shifted on its axis, and Walter Fletcher would change my life one final time. Walter collapsed on a Thursday morning in March while tuning a 1972 Martin D28. I found him crumpled behind the counter when I arrived for work, his face gray, one hand still clutching a tuning peg. The paramedics worked on him for 20 minutes before rushing him to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I followed the ambulance in my Honda, my hand shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. In the emergency room, I sat in those horrible plastic chairs for 6 hours, drinking terrible vending machine coffee and praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in. When they finally let me see him, Walter looked impossibly small in that hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped and hummed like some dystopian orchestra. His eyes found mine as I approached, and he tried to smile. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the monitors. "Come here, kiddo." I leaned in close, and his weathered hand found mine with surprising strength. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "Those guitars, they're not just instruments. They're stories. They're pieces of people's souls. You understand that, don't you? You've always understood." I nodded, tears blurring my vision. "Walter, you're going to be fine. The doctors said." "The doctors don't know everything," he interrupted, squeezing my hand. "You're the only person who's ever seen what I see when I look at those instruments. Promise me you'll take care of them. Promise me you'll keep the music alive." "I promise," I whispered. He smiled then, a real smile that reminded me of all those Tuesday evenings sharing pizza and guitar stories. "You're the daughter I never had, Evelyn. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small again." Walter died that Saturday morning while I was asleep in the chair beside his bed. The nurse woke me gently, and I knew before she said a word. The machines had gone quiet. I was devastated. Walter had been more than a boss, more than a mentor. He'd been proof that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about finding someone who sees the real you and decides you're worth loving exactly as you are. The funeral was small. A handful of long-time customers, some fellow shop owners from the neighborhood, and me. I played In My Life by the Beatles on Walter's favorite Martin, the one he'd been tuning when he collapsed. My voice broke halfway through, but I finished it for him. Afterward, I walked back to the shop and sat among the guitars, surrounded by decades of musical history and memories of the man who'd taught me that my passion wasn't silly or childish, it was sacred. I had no idea what would happen to Fletcher's vintage instruments. I assumed Walter had family somewhere, maybe grown children who'd sell everything and convert the space into another trendy coffee shop or boutique. A week later, I got a phone call that would turn my entire understanding of Walter Fletcher, and my own future, completely upside down. Sometimes grief opens doors you never knew existed. The call came on a Wednesday morning while I was sitting in my apartment, staring at a bowl of cereal I couldn't bring myself to eat. Walter had been gone for exactly 1 week, and I still couldn't process a world without his terrible jokes and endless guitar wisdom. "Miss Evelyn Parker?" The voice was crisp, professional. "This is Jonathan Kellerman from Kellerman, Rothschild and Associates. I need you to come to my office immediately regarding Walter Fletcher's estate." Estate? Walter lived in a cluttered apartment above his shop and drove a car older than some of his guitars. What kind of estate could he possibly have? I think you might have the wrong person, I said. I just worked for Mr. Fletcher. No mistake, Miss Parker. Can you be here by 2 o'clock? This is quite urgent. The law office was downtown in one of those gleaming towers that made me feel like I was wearing the wrong clothes just by walking through the lobby. Mr. Kellerman was exactly what I'd expected, silver-haired, expensive suit, the kind of handshake that meant business. Please sit, he said, gesturing to a leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly rent. This may come as quite a shock. He handed me a thick manila folder. Walter has left you his entire estate. I stared at him. I'm sorry, what? The shop, the building that houses it, his complete instrument collection, and... He paused, consulting a document. Approximately $6.2 million in various investment accounts. The folder slipped from my hands, papers scattering across his polished desk. $6.2 million? That's impossible. Walter lived like he was broke. Mr. Kellerman's expression softened slightly. Walter inherited a significant sum from his grandfather's manufacturing business in the 1980s. Instead of spending it, he invested wisely and lived modestly. He was quite wealthy, Miss Parker, though he chose not to show it. My head was spinning. Walter, with his thrift store clothes and his beat-up Honda, had been a millionaire? There's also this, Mr. Kellerman said, handing me a sealed envelope with my name written in Walter's familiar scrawl. My hands trembled as I opened it. Evelyn. If you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're probably confused as hell. Good. I always liked keeping people guessing. You're the only person who ever understood what those guitars really meant. When you played that Martin the first day we met, I saw something in your eyes that I'd been looking for my whole life, someone who heard the stories trapped in the wood and strings. I never had children of my own, but I got to watch you grow into the kind of person I always hoped to be. You chose passion over profit, music over money, authenticity over approval. Your family never appreciated what they had, but I saw it from day one. Take care of the guitars, kiddo. Take care of yourself. And remember, you're worth more than they ever realized. All my love, Walter. I sat in that expensive office and sobbed. Not just for Walter, but for 3 years of belonging, for finally being seen, for a future I'd never imagined. Within 48 hours, news of my inheritance had somehow leaked. And that's when my phone started buzzing with messages from people who'd forgotten I existed. Word travels fast in families, especially when there's money involved. By Friday morning, my phone was exploding with notifications from numbers I hadn't seen in 3 years. The first text came from my cousin Bradley. Hey Ev. Heard about your inheritance. So sorry for your loss. Would love to take you to dinner and catch up. I have some investment opportunities you might find interesting. Investment opportunities. From the guy who used to call my guitar playing noise pollution. Then Aunt Caroline, Evelyn, sweetheart. I've been thinking about you so much lately. Sunday dinner this weekend? The whole family misses you terribly. The whole family. Right. The same family who'd treated me like an embarrassing secret for the last decade. My phone kept buzzing. Cousin Stephanie, OMG girl, we need to reconnect. I have so many ideas for how you could expand that cute little guitar shop. Call me. Even Uncle Robert, who'd barely acknowledged my existence at family gatherings, sent a friend request on Facebook with a message. So proud of your success, honey. Let's grab lunch soon. The most pathetic message came from my ex-boyfriend Danny. Saw the news about Walter. I know how close you two were. Maybe we could get coffee and talk? I've been thinking about us a lot lately. Danny, who dumped me because I wasn't going anywhere in life, suddenly wanted to reconnect now that I was worth millions. But it was my mother's phone call that really got to me. She called Saturday night, sobbing before I even said hello. Evelyn, baby, I'm so sorry, she wailed. I should have supported your passion. I always knew you were special, I wanted security for you, you know? I was scared you'd struggle. Mom, I started, but she kept talking. That man Walter, he saw what I should have seen all along. You have a gift, honey. And I failed you as a mother. Can you ever forgive me? Part of me wanted to believe her. The little girl inside me who'd spent years craving my mother's approval was doing backflips. But I'd learned something important in those 3 years of silence. I didn't need their validation anymore. I need time to process everything, I told her. Of course. But Evelyn? Next weekend is your cousin Bradley's birthday party. The whole family will be there, and we'd love to celebrate your success too. Please say you'll come. For the first time in 3 years, I was not just invited to a family gathering, I was being courted. They wanted to celebrate my success. The same success they'd mocked and dismissed when it was just passion without a price tag. I thought about Walter's letter, about his words, you chose passion over profit, music over money, authenticity over approval. I'll think about it, I said. After I hung up, I sat in Fletcher's Vintage Instruments, my shop now, surrounded by guitars that had witnessed decades of music history. The same instruments my family had once seen as toys were now worth a fortune. But their value hadn't changed, only my bank account had. I was going to that birthday party. But not for the reasons they thought. It was time to show my family exactly who Evelyn Parker had become. Saturday evening arrived like a storm I'd been watching on the horizon for weeks. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the black dress I'd bought specifically for this occasion, not expensive, but elegant. Professional. The kind of outfit that said I knew exactly who I was. Bradley's birthday party was at the same country club in Winnetka where we'd celebrated family milestones for decades. Walking through those familiar doors felt like traveling back in time, except this time I wasn't the family embarrassment hiding in the corner. Evelyn. Aunt Caroline's voice cut through the cocktail chatter like a blade. She rushed toward me with arms outstretched, her smile so bright it could have powered the chandelier. You look absolutely stunning. Doesn't she look stunning, Robert? Uncle Robert appeared beside her, nodding enthusiastically. The same man who used to grunt one-word responses when I tried to make conversation now acted like we were old friends. So proud of what you've accomplished, he boomed, clapping me on the shoulder. Always knew you had it in you. Liar, I thought, but smiled politely. The evening unfolded like a masterclass in hypocrisy. Cousin Stephanie cornered me by the bar, gushing about my incredible business acumen, and how she'd always admired my independence. Bradley introduced me to his colleagues as his entrepreneurial cousin who built something amazing from nothing. Even Tiffany, Bradley's fiancée who'd laughed at my job 2 years ago, approached with champagne and compliments. I feel terrible about how distant we've all been, she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. I'd love to learn more about the music business. Maybe we could grab lunch next week. But it was my mother's behavior that really twisted the knife. She paraded me around the room like a prize she'd won, telling anyone who'd listen about my inherited music empire, and how she'd always known I was destined for greatness. Music runs in our family, she announced to a group of her friends. Evelyn gets her artistic talent from my side. I listened to this revisionist history with growing rage. These people had spent years making me feel small, worthless, like a stain on the family name. Now they were rewriting the entire narrative to make themselves look supportive. When Bradley asked me to say a few words during the birthday toast, I knew my moment had arrived. I stood up, champagne glass in hand, looking out at faces that had once made me feel invisible. Now they hung on my every word, waiting to hear from the family success story. Thank you all for welcoming me back tonight, I began, my voice steady and clear. It means so much to be here, celebrating with family. Warm smiles and approving nods rippled through the room. 3 years ago, I made a decision that changed my life forever. I decided to stop apologizing for who I was. The smiles became more uncertain. I stopped coming to these gatherings because I was tired of being treated like the family charity case. I was tired of being hidden in the back of photos and dismissed as the disappointment. The room had gone completely silent. Time for the truth. But here's what's interesting about tonight, I continued, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. Every single person who ignored me, who mocked my choices, who made me feel worthless, you're all here now, treating me like I matter. Aunt Caroline's smile had frozen into something resembling a grimace. Bradley looked like he wanted to disappear into his birthday cake. The guitars you used to call noisemakers are now a music empire. The job you laughed at, Tiffany, is now entrepreneurial brilliance. The passion you told me to abandon, Mom, is suddenly a family trait. My mother's face had gone pale. Evelyn, honey. Nothing about me has changed, I said, cutting her off. I'm still the same person who loves vintage instruments, who chose music over money, who found family in an elderly man who saw my worth when none of you could. The only thing that's different is my bank balance. The silence was deafening. Champagne glasses sat untouched on tables as my family absorbed the truth they'd been trying to avoid. Walter Fletcher taught me something none of you ever could. He taught me that a person's value isn't measured by their net worth or their job title or whether they fit into your idea of success. He taught me that authenticity matters more than approval. I looked directly at Bradley. Your investment opportunities don't interest me. I'm not looking for ways to turn Walter's legacy into profit. Then to Aunt Caroline, your Sunday dinners stopped being about family the moment you decided I wasn't worth including. To my mother, and Mom, I don't need you to suddenly discover my worth now that it's convenient. I set down my champagne glass and picked up my purse. Walter left me more than money. He left me proof that I was enough, exactly as I was. He saw a scared young woman who'd been made to feel small, and he gave her space to grow into who she was meant to be. The room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. I'm not angry anymore, I said, and I realized it was true. You can't hurt someone who knows their own value. But I won't pretend this sudden affection is real, and I won't let you rewrite history to make yourselves feel better about how you treated me. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Oh, and Bradley? Happy birthday. I hope you get everything you deserve. Outside in the parking lot, I sat in my Honda, the same beat-up car I'd driven when they were ashamed of me, and felt something I'd never experienced with my biological family, peace. My phone was already buzzing with damage control texts, but I turned it off. I had guitars to tend to, a shop to run, and a life to live on my own terms. Walter had been right in his letter. Sometimes the black sheep doesn't need to rejoin the flock. Sometimes the black sheep becomes the shepherd. And sometimes, the shepherd walks away entirely, leaving the sheep to figure out their own way home. That night, I went back to my shop and played guitar until dawn, surrounded by instruments that had stories to tell and a future that finally belonged to me.